Hard work is BS, that's a fact. It will never ever pay off. That's a lie sold to you by boomers and corporate shills to brainwash you into accepting their dogshit low wages. In fact, it's so BS I can easily prove it to you right now. Consider the fact that just about every job for young people pays you an hourly wage, 7, 10, 15 an hour or whatever. The fact that they pay you based on time and not actual productivity already by definition proves that hard work is BS. No matter how hard you work in that hour, you're still only going to get $7 an hour. If you work in a McDonald's, it doesn't matter if you flip 1 burger or 100 burgers in that hour, you're still getting the same low dog shit wage. If hard work actually did pay off as these delusional boomers try to brainwash you into believing, you'd actually be paid based on how many burgers you flip, not how many hours you work. And this is why Gen Z is so smart. This is what quiet quitting is all about. Since they've realized that they're only getting $7 in that hour no matter how many burgers they flip, you might as well just do the bare minimum since there's literally no reward for doing anything more. You know how our parents and grandparents would sit down and tell us these campfire stories about how things were back in their day? As a millennial, I've been around long enough where I can tell you Zoomers out there a quick campfire story about how gigafucked the economy has been since 2008. When I graduated high school, my first summer job was as a waiter. Except, it wasn't even actually a job, you see. This freaking restaurant didn't even want to pay the minimum wage. It was an internship where I registered with some youth employment service, and they agreed to pay me because the restaurant wouldn't. These corrupt capitalist businesses literally don't even want to pay the minimum wage. Like we sit here and debate the minimum wage all the time. Do you realize that most companies actually want the minimum wage gone? How bad is it that they are already paying you dog shit, and they're desperately fighting tooth and nail to be able to pay you even less than dog shit? But here's what was even more frustrating about it all. Today, thanks to Gen Z speaking out about these issues, a lot of the viewpoints I had some 10, 15 years ago have been validated. This is why I'm so grateful for Gen Z. But back in 2008, I was only dealing with boomers and other millennials. I'm not kidding when I tell you that I was literally the only one who woke up and realized that all this was bullshit. My boomer parents and other boomers literally tried to convince me that I was spoiled and entitled for not wanting to accept less than dog shit wages. And as I've said in many other videos, millennials for the most part are a bunch of blue-pilled simps who believed and went along with everything our boomer parents told us. This is why so many of us just went to college and racked up a ton of student loan debt that we'll never ever pay back. This is why I actually respect Gen Z guys who are just staying home playing video games. Sure, it might not be the most productive thing, but at least you're not intentionally sabotaging yourself and putting yourself 6 figures in debt. Doing nothing is better than purposely punching yourself in the face, which is what most millennials did. And what was more hilarious was that they looked at me like I was crazy when I told them I was just going to travel the world and volunteer instead of racking up a shitload of student loan debt. It's one thing if you want to punch yourself in the face, but it's next level delusion to think someone else is crazy for not punching himself in the face. I know I've been quite hard on my own generation in this video, and throughout all my videos. Make no mistake, millennials were not at fault for the 2008 crash and all the problems that came after that. We were absolutely dealt a shit hand as well. But we also did absolutely nothing to solve any of the problems. I can't help but think if more of us had Gen Z's mindset, we might already be on the way to making serious progress right now. If we had rebelled against capitalism, refused to work for dog shit wages, clap back at the boomers the way Gen Z are doing, we might already be 15 years into influencing real change at this point. Instead, we just wasted these 15 years being mindless sheep believing all the blue-pilled lies society and our boomer parents sold us. Work hard no matter how dog shit the wages are. Go to college no matter how ridiculous the student loan debt is. Believe the mainstream narrative no matter how obvious it is that it's not working anymore. And now, even though we didn't cause these problems, we had a real chance to fix them, but instead, we just quietly coped our way into believing the delusions of our boomer parents and passed these problems onto the next generation. But hey, if there's any generation that gives me a slight bit of hopium, it's Gen Z. They say that once you can clearly write down a problem, the matter is already half resolved. Gen Z has done a great job at that. I mean, the mainstream media likes to label you guys as being pessimistic, depressed, etc. But the world is objectively shit right now. Look at how screwed the economy is, how expensive everything is. If you look around you and you're not pessimistic and depressed, you're just delusionally living in an alternate reality. The way I see it, you guys are more realistic and objective than anything else. It's just that they've created such a shit world and shit economy that if you acknowledge reality, it appears as if you're being pessimistic and Doomer. And as far as all these labels of Gen Z being lazy and entitled goes, look, being lazy and entitled goes both ways. I say fuck that. You're not lazy for not wanting to work. The boomers are lazy for not fixing the economy that they ruined for younger generations. You're not lazy for quiet quitting. Companies are lazy for not paying you a fair wage and actually giving you incentive to work. They think Gen Z is toxic in the workplace? Good. They're the ones who created such a toxic workplace environment, and they deserve to get a taste of their own medicine. You're not entitled for wanting more than $7 an hour. Companies are entitled for thinking they should have the right to keep paying $7 an hour in a world where inflation has clearly soared way beyond that. If you don't make enough money to pay your rent, you get evicted at the end of the month. And in the same exact way, if companies can't afford to pay you enough for a living wage, they deserve to fail and go out of business. Laziness and entitlement is a two-way street, and it's time we start seeing it that way. Free market economics works both ways. This is why Gen Z is lazy. For example, when Hollywood makes a movie that flops, which they've been doing a lot lately, we don't say people were too lazy to go see the movie. We rightfully recognize that the movie just sucked and didn't give people enough value and incentive to want to go out and see it. The people weren't too lazy to go see the movie. Hollywood was too lazy to make a good enough movie for people to want to see. And in the same exact way, modern corporations in society are as big of a joke as Hollywood now. The salaries, benefits, and overall futures they're offering young people these days is about as garbage as every Hollywood movie has been the last few years. So it's not that Gen Z is lazy for not wanting to accept their garbage. It's that modern corporations and society are the actual lazy ones for not producing a good enough society and economy where there's actually enough value and incentive for young people to work. I was having a conversation with my boomer stepfather recently, as I was genuinely curious how life actually was in the 60s. Unlike most boomers, this guy's actually relatively reasonable and objective, and he admits things have gotten harder today. I asked him what minimum wage and rent were when he was in his 20s. He responded that minimum wage was about $1.85 per hour, and his rent was about $50 per month. To correspond anecdotal evidence with empirical data, I went ahead to double-check and cross-reference this with official historical data. It was surprisingly hard to actually find official statistics of the 1960s economy and living costs. You would think that given we're living in the absolute peak of the information age, where you can look up anything with the click of a button, it should be easy to find. But I had to do a lot of digging to find official statistics. Really makes you wonder if they're intentionally hiding this information in order to keep gaslighting the youth into believing you have it better than ever today. Anyways, after a lot of digging, I finally found some official stats. According to these websites, minimum wage in the 60s was around $1.60 depending on the exact year, and average rent across America was $71. I suppose my dad just found a cheaper than average location, but the point remains the same. Rent was insanely cheap back then. Delusional boomers will often respond with, but wages were lower back then too. So let's see exactly how much wages were relative to rent. Taking out a simple calculator to do some 5th grade math here, we see that 71 divided by 1.6 comes out to around 44.4. This means that in a little over a week's worth of full-time minimum wage work, a boomer could have paid his entire rent for his own apartment for the whole month. This meant that rent only cost 1/4 of his monthly wage, and the other 3/4 could be used on food, leisure, hanging out, enjoying life, going on dates, all things that have become unaffordable for young people today. Keep in mind, this is just a minimum wage job. A job just about everyone back then could get straight out of high school. No training, no qualifications, no student loans debts, no having to apply to a million applications online. Things back then were literally as simple as walking into a restaurant, asking if they needed help. And most of the time, the answer was yes, and they'd give you a job. Not only did jobs pay way more, but they were way easier to get. Now let's compare this to the rent minimum wage ratio for Gen Z today. Rent prices across America average out to $1,739 today. Minimum wage is the same dogshit $7.25 it's been since 2009. Do you remember that boomers only had to work 44 hours to pay their whole rent? Keep that figure in mind because the next number is about to shock you. When we divide today's average rent by the minimum wage, the amount of hours Gen Z would have to work just to pay their rent is a shocking, brace yourselves, 240 hours. This is a shocking 6 times more than what boomers had to do. And please spare me the whole, oh, if you don't want to work minimum wage, you need to go out and acquire a skill. What skill did you have to acquire to make effectively 6 times more money in the 1960s? That was the minimum wage that just about everyone was able to make back then, even out of high school. It wasn't like back then you had to get a PhD and wear a nice fancy suit just to make the minimum wage. So just cut the crap with that nonsense. Now, let's do one more stat comparison here. What hourly wage would Gen Z have to make in order to match the purchasing power that boomers had with the minimum wage in the 60s? In other words, you remember how boomers could pay their entire month's rent in just 40 hours, or a week's worth of work. How much would Gen Z have to be making per hour in order to be able to do the same? To find out, let's put our 5th grade math skills on again and divide $1,739, the average rent price, by 44. The answer comes out to a shocking $39.50 per hour. That's right, the average boomer was making the equivalent of $40 an hour on a minimum wage job. Now let me ask you this. If you could easily get a $40 an hour minimum wage job straight out of high school by just walking into a venue and asking for a job, do you think that might motivate people to work more? Do you think that might make people, quote unquote, less lazy? These are all obviously rhetorical questions that don't even need answering. It's time we start looking at laziness as a two-way street. All of the problems you see in today's economy originated in the 2000s, when the oldest Gen Z were children and the youngest weren't even born yet. Blaming Gen Z for this is a legitimately, clinically insane opinion to have. Gen Z is being blamed for not fixing an absolute dumpster fire of a mess they inherited. Meanwhile, boomers were literally handed everything on a golden platter from their parents' generation, and all they had to do was keep the momentum going. I can understand not being able to improve your current situation, but being handed an absolute economic utopia and somehow managing to throw it all down the drain is just a completely unforgivable sin. And then on top of that, being delusional and narcissistic enough to blame the next generation as being lazy for not cleaning up the massive mess you created. This is just the worst generation ever. You're the actual lazy ones for not cleaning up your own mess. Boomers are extremely pro-capitalist and like to look at everything through a capitalist lens. I've made my opinions very clear that I think capitalism sucks, but for the sake of conversation, I'm willing to listen to capitalist philosophies if you apply them fairly and consistently. If we're going to think of everything from a supply and demand framework, then we need to equally apply it to corporations as we do to individuals. We always tell individuals that their garbage low wages are justified because there just isn't that much market demand for their skills. Well, it's time we throw their own logic right back at them and force them to live by their own philosophies. If no one wants to work, it's not because they're lazy. It's because you're too lazy to pay them enough money. It's because there's just not enough market demand and incentive to work for the dog shit low wages you want to pay. Good evening, young Zoomers. Today, we gather around the campfire as I tell you a generational tale of how positive thinking destroyed my generation, the Millennials. My hope is that you will learn from our mistakes so that you will not repeat them, not repeat them. Kidlin's Law. If you can write down the problem clearly, it is already half solved. This law, saying, philosophy, whatever you want to call it, has made a huge impact on my life after I learned about it. I realized how much time I wasted trying to solve the wrong problem because I didn't even know what the actual problem was. Let's say you wake up one day with a serious but curable illness. You don't know exactly what it is, but you're feeling some strange symptoms. If you're just a delusionally optimistic positive thinker, you will convince yourself that it's not a big deal and that it'll just go away. But if you're a doomer, you will instantly recognize that it's a problem, a huge problem, and go see the doctor to get it fixed as soon as possible. I spend a lot of time on this channel shitting on boomers, and rightfully so. But one thing that's inescapable is the fact that millennials are for the most part children of boomers. Gen Z, on the other hand, are mostly children of the more jaded Gen X. And as much as we try to separate ourselves from our parents, there's going to be some irreversible influence from them as we were raised by them in our most formidable years. This goes without saying, but boomers are easily the most insanely delusional, optimistic generation ever. America's the greatest, you can achieve anything if you work hard, etc. To be fair to millennials, we did grow up in the 90s and early 2000s when times were good, and so it made sense to blindly follow the hard-coping, toxic optimism of our boomer parents. But here's the problem. Boomers could afford to be optimistic because they grew up in the booming post-war economy of the 60s. Their optimism matched their socioeconomic conditions, and thus at least it was rooted in reality. Millennials, on the other hand, had the same delusional optimism as our boomer parents, but in this giga-fucked modern economy. That's not good. In fact, that is a recipe for disaster. The best analogy I can give is this. Let's say you get lost in the forest. You find yourself face to face with a hungry grizzly bear that hasn't eaten in 3 days. If your attitude is that you live in the greatest country on earth and that you can do anything if you believe in yourself, even defeat this bear with your bare hands, you're going to get absolutely wrecked. If, on the other hand, you're a doomer and you recognize reality for what it is, you'll accept that no matter how hard you work, you're not going to defeat this grizzly bear. Either you're going to have to calm it down, distract it, run up a tree and escape, whatever. You're going to look for realistic solutions to your current crisis. Sometimes you'll get eaten alive anyways, but at least you give yourself a much better chance of survival.
The hardest, most worrisome parts of this generation is that they have the lowest sense of efficacy. They report an external locus of control, meaning they don't think they can improve their lives. See, millennials thought they could do anything, right? They are the Mark Zuckerberg generation. And that's why we had so many tech founders in that generation. We're not seeing that with these young people.
This lady is actually right for once, factually speaking, but her interpretation of the facts is completely backwards. Yes, she's right that millennials did believe they could do anything. And as a millennial myself, I can safely say that this was the cause of our downfall. For every one Mark Zuckerberg or billionaire tech founder, there's a million, if not more, millennials who believed they could do anything and ended up just getting crushed with an insurmountable amount of student loan debt that will haunt them for the rest of their lives. There are things in life you just objectively can't do. You can't beat Brock Lesnar in a fist fight. You can't jump off a building and expect to grow wings and fly. And for 99% of people, you can't get ahead and make it in this BS economy. Believing that you can isn't just silly, it's actually dangerous. As if you actually try to do any of these things, you're going to be in for a world of pain. So as someone who grew up constantly bombarded with this delusional positive thinking from both my boomer parents and millennial peers, seeing Gen Z's Doomerism is actually quite a refreshing breath of fresh air. I wouldn't even necessarily call it Doomerism, it's more just realism. I mean, the economy and the world are legitimately shit right now. The numbers, statistics, and individual experiences from people all back this up. If you're feeling pessimistic in a world where there are objectively a ton of horrible things going on, is this really being pessimistic or doomer? Or is this just matching your expectations with reality? What do you want me to do? Am I supposed to lie and say things are going great when they're not? When you check the weather report, would you rather it just lie to you and say every single day is going to be perfect sunny weather? Or would you want to know which days are going to be god-awful pouring rain, so not to go out or make plans that day? Another great example outside of the economy of how Gen Z Doomerism mogs millennial positive thinking is in the world of dating. Millennial men were the ultimate coping simps when it came to dating. Anytime one of my friends was interested in a girl, there was an unbelievable amount of cope every time it became clear she wasn't interested back. Oh, maybe she didn't read your message yet. Oh, maybe she's just busy. Oh, sometimes girls don't show interest right away. You should keep trying. The last piece of advice, by the way, would literally land you in jail today, which is a perfect example of why positive thinking is so dangerous. But you Gen Z chads, on the other hand, are just built different. you guys will straight up just be like, bro, she read your message. Everyone has their phones on them 24/7. She's just not interested. Move the fuck on already. This might be a bitter pill to swallow in the moment, but you'll quickly recover and either move on to the next girl or just give up on dating altogether and chill and play video games. Both options are way better than constantly checking your phone for months on end, waiting for a text when you already knew she wasn't interested. Believe me, older generations of men actually did this a lot, and it was excruciatingly painful to watch. A lot of you guys have been asking me to provide actual solutions instead of only pointing out problems. For all I know, I'm just another delusional millennial positive thinker, and you Gen Z doomer chads might be wiser than me when it comes to solutions. But if you want my advice, here it is. Be a doomer and give up on things that are outside of your control. This is why I've said young men should give up on work, and in some cases on dating, because those things are outside of your control. Whether a girl or a company accepts you or not is entirely their decision. And so, putting a ton of time, energy, and effort in hopes of getting someone else's approval is a losing game for most people. But have a little positive thinking and optimism when it comes to your own life and things you do have control over. Work out, eat healthy, learn to cook your own meals, find hobbies and passions you enjoy, get good at something, whether that's a sport or a video game, and do it all for yourself and your own personal fulfillment. You don't need the approval of your parents, society, women, or anyone else. If you would like to see a more detailed guide as to how you can do all these things, check out this video right here. One of the best books I've ever read in my life is The Lazy Way to Success by Fred Gatson. This book was very profound and eye-opening in the sense that it provides a much more accurate perception of laziness compared to the general societal narrative. The truth is, laziness is not inherently a bad thing. In fact, it is a very good thing when you consider it from this perspective. Every single technological breakthrough and advancement in human history was inspired by laziness. Think about it. People invented chairs because they were too lazy to stand around all day. People invented cars because they were too lazy to walk everywhere. People invented computers because they were too lazy to manually track and store information themselves. So as you can see, laziness is not a problem in and of itself. In fact, it's actually a good thing. So if laziness isn't the problem itself, what's the actual issue here? Older generations who like to criticize Gen Z are typically delusional and unaware of the concept of cost-benefit analysis. They lived in an era where hard work directly translated to success and have ignorantly projected this outdated viewpoint onto younger generations. The truth is, hard work doesn't pay off in the modern world anymore. It's all about smart, efficient work and getting as much bang for your buck as possible. In other words, efficiency. Older generations only cared about money and success, and as a result, completely sabotaged their own health and happiness in pursuit of it. Their oversimplistic mindset causes them to only see the benefit without evaluating the cost. Gen Z is really the first generation smart enough to understand cost-benefit analysis. They've realized that money is not the only valuable resource in the world and in life. Everything is a resource. Your time, your energy, your happiness, these are all resources, just as, if not more, valuable than money. This is why a lot of Zoomers just want to be YouTubers and influencers. And while they often get criticized for this, I actually respect the hell out of them for this as a millennial. Even if you never make it as an influencer, at least you're talking about and doing things that you personally enjoy. It's at least efficient from a personal fulfillment standpoint, if nothing else. Out of all the unfair labels older generations project onto Gen Z, the one that bothered me the most was entitled. At first, I didn't understand why that label specifically bothered me more than any other, but after thinking about it, I finally realized why. Entitlement goes both ways, but we view it as only a one-way street, and the sheer hypocrisy of it all is what bothered me the most. For example, corporations and older generations are always calling Gen Z entitled for not wanting to work. But if they would take just one moment to look in the mirror, they'd see their own entitlement is way worse. Corporations are the actual entitled ones. What makes them think they're entitled to $7 an hour cheap youth labor in an economy where inflation has soared way beyond that? Older generations are the actual entitled ones. They think they're entitled to shame young people for not wanting to work after they ruined the economy and made it impossible for young people to find work in the first place. It's funny because these corporations and boomers are so free market capitalist, but are completely oblivious to how free market capitalist principles go both ways. If I walk into an electronics store and want to buy a TV, I have to give them enough money to buy that TV. I can't blame and shame the store for not wanting to sell me the TV at a cheaper price. And in the exact same way, if that store wants me to work for them, it has to show me that it's willing to pay me enough money and provide decent enough working conditions that I actually want to work for them. Working is inherently an unpleasant task for the overwhelming majority of people, but absorbing temporary unhappiness for a much greater reward in the future is generally a worthy trade-off, or at least it was in the past. For example, the study I'm sure you've all heard of where they told kids you could have 1 marshmallow right now, or 2 marshmallows, if you waited 15 minutes. Obviously, in this case, waiting 15 minutes for another tasty dessert is the right choice. But this paradigm only works if you are actually promised the second marshmallow later. In the real world today, it's more like you can choose between having 1 marshmallow now or half, or even none tomorrow. Inflation is running rampant. Housing prices are impossibly expensive and are only going to get worse. There's no promised future the way there was in the past. So if that's the case, might as well take the single marshmallow and enjoy what you can right now. The thing I find most amusing about all this discourse around Gen Z being lazy is that all the delusional boomers who love pushing this narrative are the most hypocritical lazy fucks themselves. We recently exposed 2 prominent boomers, the fake doctor Dr. Phil and financial expert Dave Ramsey as a perfect example of this. Both of them complain that Gen Z just sits on their butts all day, while they themselves do nothing but sit on their butts all day. If a hardworking construction worker who was doing manual labor and toiling in the hot sun 12 hours a day wanted to come lecture me about hard work, I might disagree with him, but I would at least listen to him as he's putting his money where his mouth is. But it's kind of very telling that all the people telling you to work hard refuse to work hard themselves. They themselves realize that hard work is overrated, outdated BS, which is why you never see any of them doing any job other than sitting on their ass and talking all day. 100 years ago, in the early 1900s, it was common for children as young as 10 to work in factories to support their families. Today, we universally recognize that as inhumane and barbaric. The world and economy changed, and so did people's mentalities. Now, in this economy, where landing a job is tougher than ever, and rent is skyrocketing to $2,000 a month, our boomer and Gen X parents, who grew up in the booming economy of the 1960s, still expect us to move out and be financially independent by the age of 18. But here's what's crazy. More time has passed between now and 1960 than between 1960 and 1900. This means that in 1960, the same exact way your parents view child labor of the 1900s as outdated and cruel, one day, the expectation of moving out at 18 in today's economy will be seen as equally insane. The next time one of your boomer or Gen X parents says that Gen Z is lazy and asks, "Why aren't you guys moving out?" ask them if they were doing child labor when they were 10. If they weren't, then they're just as soft and lazy compared to the generation before them, and they have no right to talk.
They weren't the 54% of Gen Z who doesn't want to live with anyone but mom. These are 18 to 25-year-olds. Sorry.
That's wild.
54% of them are living with parents. And the kids today are thinking, I can't. I need to be with mom and dad, even at 18 to 25.
Yeah, because it offers you comfort.
Right.
Yeah. But then there's other cultures where people are happy and the family's a very tight unit and people don't leave the house until they're married.
Right. That's not our culture. So in those cultures, I think it's a different situation and it is healthier, meaning they have their own ways of doing things and, you know, they get a job and they don't leave the home until they're married. And that is the way they define growing up. But in this culture, we have always defined growing up is leaving your parents' home, getting some sort of job, supporting yourself in some way, making strong, enduring relationships with others, starting a family.
Right.
We have a vision in this culture, and we are not producing that.
Which one's right? Which culture is correct, though? Is the culture that enforces family and they have this very tight bond and they don't leave until they're establishing their own family? and then that family stays in connection with the other family. Is that the way to do it? Or is the way we do it, where we cast them out?
This woman is absolutely unbearable to listen to. She looks and sounds like one of those banshees from The Witcher 3 who deal damage sheerly through how annoying their voice sounds. I got a question for this lady. First of all, who the fuck are you to determine what our culture is or isn't? Did someone appoint you the universal dictator of youth culture? You're old, your time is up, you have no idea how the modern world works, and you don't dictate what the youth culture is anymore. As far as I'm concerned, the only people who should be dictating youth culture are the youth themselves. And if you guys decide, as you should, that there should no longer be this insane cultural expectation to move out at 18, that is your choice, not theirs. Second of all, as far as which culture is the right one, as someone who has traveled 25 countries and 4 continents, I can answer that question for you. In every other country I've been to besides the toxic American one, it is completely normal and acceptable for young adults to live with their parents until they are 30 or until they get married. In this time, they work or study and get to actually save up money. And by the time they move out in their mid to late 20s, they're able to actually buy their own apartment instead of constantly bleeding money to ever-increasing rent prices. Rent itself is the biggest scam ever. You literally pay to live, and that money's just gone every month. It doesn't even help you build towards anything long-term. But that's perhaps a subject for another video. Meanwhile, in America, you got shit like this going on.
I saved $100,000 by the time I was 27. Here are my top money-saving tips. Saving that much money was no walk in the park, but I was lucky to have the support of my mother, who worked tirelessly to help pay for all 4 years of my college tuition, which was roughly $35,000 per year.
Okay, so basically, you saved $100,000 by having your mom give you $140,000.
You serious?
I mean, this is becoming satire at this point. This economy and toxic culture is so fucked that you have people who are literally celebrating being $40,000 in debt as an accomplishment. I recently made a video about how both liberals and conservatives suck right now. This is one area in which conservatives are hypocritical and dishonest. Conservatives really argue against the concept of moral relativism. The idea that all cultures are all equal and morally good or bad is relative to your cultural norms. The thing is, I actually agree with them on this. But at the same time, they get all butthurt and sensitive, and they become offended snowflakes themselves anytime you criticize something about America. If you're against moral relativism and use that argument to justify why your culture is better than others, you also have to be willing to accept when other cultures do things better than yours. You have to be willing to ask yourself why, in other cultures, young adults are able to afford to buy their own properties, whereas in America, they're forever drowned in debt. It can't just be used as a one-way argument whenever it conveniently favors the West. And this is something that I've seen time and again other cultures do way better than America. I want to be fair about one thing. As unfair and delusional this boomer mentality of kicking you out at 18 is, I do think just a small percentage of it comes from a good place. I personally was forced to move out at 17, and while most of the effects were overwhelmingly negative, there were a few positives that came from it. For example, this did force me to go out and socialize more, which helped me overcome my social anxiety. This came in real handy when I checked out of society by moving abroad. But I do believe you can develop these skills even if you're living with your parents. I don't think the problem is so much living with parents itself, as much as it is that some people who do it get too complacent. If you are fortunate enough to have understanding parents who will allow you to live with them, view this as an opportunity to build yourself instead of an excuse to do nothing. You can learn to save up a lot of money, cook healthy meals, exercise, and make friends. And then, when you're actually ready to move out, you will be in a much better place than just being thrown out onto the streets at 18 in this dog shit economy.